Okay, so today we're doing something a little different. We're going deep, really deep, into one person's experience with the Bodyopus diet from back in 1996.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff. We've got these weekly diaries, and let me tell you, this person was meticulous. Every detail, what they ate, the supplements, their workouts, even their thoughts and observations, it's all in there.
It's like a time capsule from the 90s fitness scene. And what's so cool is it's not just a retrospective look back. It's all written in real time.
Yeah, you really get a sense of this person's journey, like you're right there with them, figuring things out week by week.
Exactly. We're talking precise body composition measurements every Monday, like down to the gram.
They were even doing their workouts on a life cycle, you know, those stationary bikes.
Oh, yeah.
And they were tracking their heart rate throughout.
Super dedicated.
And then, just to make it even more interesting, you've got these little anecdotes sprinkled in.
Right, like that funny story about Grog, whoever that is.
Yeah, it's from their college food service days, just a little glimpse into their life outside the diet.
It makes it feel so real, you know, not just a bunch of numbers on a page.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's jump in. Right off the bat, they talk about the Bodyopus diet as outlined by Dan the Man.
Dan the Man, huh? Gotta love those 90s nicknames.
Right. And they mention having some trouble initially actually getting into ketosis. They even wonder if it might be the diet soda they were drinking.
The citric acid.
Yeah, they thought that might be interfering somehow. It really shows you how every little thing can matter when you're trying to shift your metabolism like that.
It's all connected. So they're tracking their food, their workouts, their body composition. Did they change anything up as they went along?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So towards the end of their carb-up phases, they started incorporating more complex carbs and solid proteins, like chicken, for example.
Interesting.
It seems like they were starting to think about the type of carbs they were eating, not just the total amount.
Makes sense.
And later on, they even considered stopping the ephedrine. That was part of their supplement stack, right?
CA stack, yeah.
They were wondering if they should up their calories, too. You know, thinking about long-term sustainability and how their body was adapting.
It sounds like they were constantly evaluating, looking for ways to optimize.
Right. And there's even mention of Dan's isometric diet. So they're clearly thinking beyond just the cyclical keto phases.
Always looking for the next thing.
And get this, they start thinking about their thyroid function, specifically T3 levels.
Okay, that's getting pretty deep into the weeds.
Right. They're wondering if their activity level might be affecting their thyroid. And then they mention yohimbine.
Yohimbine, yeah.
Yeah, as a way to boost their body temperature. So you can see they're really digging into the science, trying to understand everything that's going on in their body.
Like a walking experiment.
Yeah.
So what about those supplements? They mentioned the ECA stack, right?
Yeah, ephedrine, caffeine, aspirin, plus L-tyrosine.
Yeah.
Classic combo. And they were also playing around with vanadyl and chromium.
Oh, yeah. Those were big back then for insulin sensitivity.
Right. The idea was to help your body use insulin more effectively. And they were really trying to understand the science behind it all. They even referenced this book by Daniel Mowry, Fat Management, the Thermogenic Factor.
Okay. Serious dedication there.
Right. And they pull out all these interesting details like how to dose the ECA stack, supporting your adrenal glands, even the best time to take it in relation to meals.
Fascinating. So what did they find out about training? They were doing those high-rep depletion workouts initially, right?
Yeah, that was part of the Bodyopus protocol. But honestly, they started to question whether it was really necessary, especially since they weren't competing or anything.
Makes you think, right?
Totally. They actually wondered if those heavy tension workouts, you know, the more traditional style, might be just as effective, if not better, for fat loss.
For that average person?
Exactly. And then they start experimenting with a split routine, like hitting their weaker body parts earlier in the week, maybe to take advantage of the strength gains from the carb up.
Clever.
Oh.
Did they see any changes in their strength?
Oh, yeah. They specifically mention progress on chin-ups and dips. And there's this really relatable moment where they think back to their high school days, struggling with fitness.
Oh, that's sweet.
It just reminds you that there's always a story behind these experiments.
Totally. Okay, let's dive into the keto part.
Mm-hmm.
They were tracking their ketone levels, right?
Yeah, meticulously. And they actually started questioning some of the stuff Dan the Man was saying. Like, Dan believed that high ketone levels in the evening meant you were eating too many calories.
Interesting.
But our diarists found that wasn't always true. They did some near-complete fasting, and guess what? High evening ketones.
Huh. So much for that theory.
Right. It shows you how individual responses can vary. And then they bring in this book about epilepsy treatment, which gets into the whole ketogenic ratio thing.
Okay, so for those who don't know, what's the ketogenic ratio all about?
It's basically the proportion of fat, protein, and carbs in your diet. And for ketosis, that fat intake is crucial.
Got to keep that fat high.
Exactly. But they also mentioned that it wasn't always easy hitting their calorie targets while maintaining that high fat to protein ratio.
Yeah, I can imagine. What kind of things were they eating?
We're talking cheese sticks, cream cheese, salmon with mayo, protein shakes loaded with oils, even heavy cream. It sounds like a pretty interesting culinary experience.
Not for the faint of heart.
No kidding. Okay, let's talk carb-ups. Did they stick to the classic Bodyopus approach?
Well, they did experiment with shortening the carb-up phase, as a way to kind of minimize any fat gain from potential overeating.
Smart move.
They were also really paying attention to their workout performance, both during and after the carb-ups. And they even give us some specific examples of what they were eating.
Lucky Charms, tuna with ranch dressing. Oh, and lots of ice skating.
Ice skating.
Yeah, sounds like they were factoring that activity into their carb-up strategy. And it's interesting, they compare Bodyopus to the anabolic diet. They noticed Bodyopus was stricter with the carb-up guidelines.
I see, like the type and timing of carbs?
Right, whereas the anabolic diet was a bit more, I guess you could say, relaxed, especially when it came to fat during the carb-up.
Interesting. So back to supplements. Any other insights there?
Well, they revisited creatine and carnitine. Remember, Dan was a big advocate for both.
Right.
But they weren't totally convinced about carnitine's benefits, for exercise performance. They'd done their own research, which is always a good thing.
Never take anything at face value.
Exactly. And then there's the whole glucose disposal agents thing. Vanadyl, chromium, magnesium.
Right. Those are popular for enhancing insulin sensitivity.
And they were trying to figure out the best timing, like maybe on low-carb days to smooth the transition into ketosis, and then possibly again during the carb-up to help with glycogen replenishment.
I see, making the most of those carbs.
Yeah, maximizing those glycogen stores. Now, they also address some common keto questions and misconceptions in the diaries, like what foods are actually okay on low-carb days?
Meat, cheese, oils, low-carb veggies, right?
Pretty much. And they even get into the caffeine and insulin debate. Remember how they thought diet soda might be messing with their ketosis?
Oh, yeah.
Well, they actually think it might be the citric acid or NutraSweet, not the caffeine itself, that causes problems for some people.
That's a good point.
And they share their recommended ECA stack dosages, emphasizing the importance of cycling.
Safety first.
Absolutely. And they even warn about the dangers of mixing ephedrine with clenbuterol.
Not a good idea.
Nope. They touch on other potential fat loss aids too, like L-tyrosine, L-carnitine, HCA Citramax, but they're always careful to mention any skepticism they have based on their own experience and the research.
Always thinking critically. I like that.
Me too.
Yeah.
So they keep experimenting with their training, right? Remember, they weren't convinced about those depletion workouts.
Right.
Well, they continue to play around with different training splits, trying to find what works best for them while on keto. And they note how training volume and intensity seem to impact their ketosis.
Interesting. So it's all connected, diet and training. Now, this next part is really intriguing. They come up with this hypothesis about water intake and ketones.
Oh, yeah, this is cool. So remember their earlier idea that maybe drinking more water could help with fat loss?
Vaguely. Remind me.
Well, they thought that by diluting the ketones in the blood, it might trigger the body to produce more. Like if your body is excreting ketones in your urine, it might think it needs to make more.
Wow, that's pretty out there.
I know, right?
Right.
They even connect it to ketogenic diets used for epilepsy. Since maintaining high ketone levels is important for that, maybe water intake needs to be controlled differently.
Makes you think.
So as the experiment goes on, their focus kind of shifts towards body recomposition, losing fat and gaining muscle at the same time.
The holy grail.
Right, and they start tweaking their macros and calorie intake for the carb-up phase, emphasizing high carbs, low fat, and moderate protein.
A big shift from the low-carb, high-fat days.
Totally. And they really emphasize the importance of those glucose disposal agents during the carb-up to maximize glycogen storage.
It's all about timing.
Exactly. And as they get more comfortable with the diet, they even start experimenting with these pre-workout carb spikes.
While staying mostly keto the rest of the time.
Right. And they're already thinking ahead to a future mass phase where they'll focus on building muscle.
Smart planning.
And of course, they plan to adjust their training intensity and volume accordingly.
Always adapting. Did they notice any long-term adaptations to the Bodyopus diet?
Oh, yeah. They mentioned getting into ketosis faster the longer they stuck with it. Like their body just became more efficient at using ketones for fuel.
Makes sense. The body's pretty amazing like that.
And they even discuss different variations of Bodyopus, like a slower carb up or shorter versus longer low-carb periods. They even mention Vince Gironda's methods.
The Iron Guru.
Right. So they're clearly aware of all the different ways you can approach a ketogenic diet. And here's a thought-provoking one. They wonder if lowering their fat intake after they're already in ketosis might actually help them burn more body fat.
Interesting idea.
Oh.
Push the body to utilize its own stores.
Exactly. Now, it wasn't all just about numbers and science.
Well, of course not. It's a human experience.
They talk about interactions with a dietitian and even people on online forums, which shows you how much the keto conversation was already happening back then.
Wow, the early days of internet fitness.
And they're honest about their struggles with cravings and the whole all-or-nothing mentality that a lot of people face with dieting.
Oh, relatable.
Plus, those little humorous moments and personal reflections just make the whole thing so much more engaging.
It's like reading a friend's diary.
Okay, so finally, we get to the results. They lay out their final body composition data, which is pretty impressive. And they talk about the accuracy of body fat percentage calculations and the value of skin fold measurements.
Old school, but effective.
And they take the time to thank the people who supported them and address some of the criticisms they faced about keto.
Nice touch.
So, what are your biggest takeaways from all of this?
Well, for me, it just drives home how individual ketogenic dieting really is. What works for one person might not work for another, and you really have to pay attention to your own body's signals.
Totally agree. Meticulous tracking and self-awareness are key. And we see that throughout the diary, right? They're constantly adjusting, experimenting, trying to find what works best for them.
It's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to nutrition.
And we also see how much room there is for variation and fine-tuning, depending on your goals, whether it's rapid fat loss, body recomposition, or even transitioning into a muscle-building phase.
The possibilities are endless.
And it really highlights the ongoing debate and exploration within the keto world.
There were some real aha moments for me in those diaries. Like, I was blown away by how much detail they tracked and how they uncovered those subtle influences like the diet soda thing.
That was pretty eye-opening. For me, it was seeing how their training approach evolved. They moved away from just blindly following the Bodyopus protocol and started adapting things based on their own observations and goals.
Makes you realize how important it is to question assumptions and think critically.
Absolutely. And their deep dive into the ketogenic ratios, even bringing in research from epilepsy treatment, shows just how dedicated they were to understanding the science behind it all.
So for our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has given you a glimpse into what it really means to be well-informed about a dietary approach. It's not just about reading a few articles or following the latest trends. It's about being willing to experiment, track your progress, and most importantly, listen to your own body.
This brings us to a final thought for you to ponder. What are the limits of self-experimentation when it comes to nutrition and fitness? While personal accounts like this can be incredibly valuable, what can we learn from them that might be missing from larger-scale studies? We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.